Your room is dark, your body is still, and yet you are not really in the room. You are walking through a conversation that never happened, or a city that does not exist. For millions of people, this is the real last act of the day, not sleep, but a private fiction that arrives just before sleep does. It can feel like a warm blanket or an endless hallway. Sometimes it is both in the same night. The strange part is that this is not a failure to fall asleep. It is a psychological process with its own logic. When the outside world goes quiet, some people do not simply power down. They start to build. They replay an argument, invent a romance, redo a job interview, or return to a fictional universe they have been constructing for years. The question is not whether this is normal. The question is what the mind is trying to do in those final waking minutes. Meet Elena. Her day was ordinary until a meeting went sideways. Her boss dismissed an idea she had worked on for weeks. She smiled, nodded, and moved on. But now, at 11 at night, she is not relaxing. She is back in the meeting. Only this time, she says the perfect sentence. Her boss looks surprised, then apologizes. Her colleagues nod with respect. The scene loops, becomes sharper, and 30 minutes disappear. Elena is not just remembering. She is editing. Now, meet Marcus. His day was lonely and tightly scheduled. But at night he returns to a city he has imagined for over a decade. He knows its streets, its rival families, its hidden gardens. He does not tell anyone about it. The city is not a sign of illness to him. It is a place where he feels competent, connected, and free. When he lies down, he picks a district and lets the story continue. For Marcus, fantasy before sleep is not an escape from life. It is a second life that runs alongside the first. These two people reveal the first layer. Pre-sleep fantasy is not one single habit. It ranges from replaying real events to inventing entire worlds. Some people do it visually, with clear pictures. Others do it more through language, almost like narrating a novel in their head. Some fantasies are soothing. Others are thrilling, romantic, or even painful. What they share is a shift in attention. The demands of the day are gone, and the mind turns inward. Here is the small mechanism underneath that shift. When outside tasks disappear, the brain does not become blank. A set of regions that helps you think about other people, remember the past, and imagine the future becomes more active. During a busy afternoon, this network is constantly interrupted by a notification, a deadline, or a conversation. At night, those interruptions drop away. The result is that your social imagination suddenly has more room. It is a little like a stage after the audience leaves. The play can keep running, but now it is private. Then another layer appears as sleep gets closer. The border between thinking and dreaming becomes thinner. A simple image can turn into a full scene without your permission. That is why a small fantasy can suddenly feel so vivid, almost like a memory. The brain is sliding toward a state where it does not check every detail against reality. This is not dangerous. It is the normal doorway to sleep. But it means the stories we start at night have more power than the ones we start at noon. Then a second loop takes over. A fantasy is not neutral. If it feels good, the brain registers a small reward. The next night, at the same quiet moment, the same story becomes easier to start. Repeat this for a week, and the pathway gets stronger. In plain words, attention plus relief equals a habit. Elena's mind learned that replaying the meeting reduces the sting of being dismissed. Marcus's mind learned that entering his city produces a feeling of belonging. Neither person decided to train their brain. The training happened in the dark. This is where most people get it wrong. Pre-sleep fantasy is often treated as a sign of immaturity, laziness, or avoidance. But many people use it as a precise emotional tool. If the day made you feel powerless, your mind may create a scene where you are strong. If the day made you feel unseen, your mind may create a conversation where you are finally heard. If the day felt cold, the fantasy may be warm. The logic is almost too simple. Unmet need plus a quiet dark room equals an invitation to imagine. There are three needs that show up again and again. First, the need to feel in control. A fantasy lets you direct every line, every reaction, every outcome. Second, the need to feel capable. In the imagined scene, you can be the person who knows the right answer or makes the decisive move. Third, the need to feel close to others. Even an imaginary romance or friendship can ease loneliness for a while. The mind is not confused about what is real. It is using a simulation to meet a real need, but not everyone simulates in the same way. Some people are more absorbed by inner imagery in general. They get lost in books, films, or daydreams easily. For them, the transition into pre-sleep fantasy is almost automatic. Others need more effort. They may replay a single, real moment rather than build a whole world. The content also shifts with life circumstances. A period of low control at work tends to produce more power fantasies. A period of social isolation tends to produce more intimate or social fantasies. The night story is often a mirror held up to the day. There's also a less obvious type. Some people do not fantasize about winning. They rehearse feared events. They imagine a hard conversation, a medical result, or a moment of failure. This can look like worry, but it is still fantasy. The difference is that the imagined scene is negative. The function is not always pleasure. Sometimes it is an attempt to prepare, to soften a blow, or to feel a little less surprised if the worst happens. That is why a blanket statement about pre-sleep fantasy is never enough. The content matters. Now shift to the hidden cost. The same process that soothes can also trap. If the fantasy is the only place where a person feels powerful or loved, the brain may prefer it over real action. The reward becomes stronger than the discomfort of changing something in daylight. This is not a moral failure. It is a loop that has learned to run too well. The clearest warning sign is not that you fantasize before sleep. It is that sleep itself starts to suffer. Imagine a clock creeping past midnight. Elena has now replayed her meeting 6 times. Each version feels good for a moment, but the original sting is still waiting underneath. She checks the time, feels a small jolt of frustration, and then returns to the fantasy to calm down. The fantasy is no longer a bridge to sleep. It is a door that keeps opening away from sleep. In this version, the story has switched from repair to repetition. The need is still real, but the method has stopped working. A useful contrast is the difference between an intentional wind down and an automatic loop. When Marcus enters his city, he often feels a gentle settling. His body relaxes, his breathing slows, and sleep eventually arrives. When Elena replays her meeting, she feels awake, alert, and slightly tense. The content is not the only thing that matters. The emotional temperature matters. A calm, absorbing fantasy can help the nervous system shift down. A high-stakes, edited confrontation can keep it revved up even while the body lies still. This is the practical turn. If you are someone who fantasizes before sleep, you do not need to stop. You may need to notice what the fantasy is doing. Ask yourself a simple question before the story takes over. Am I moving toward rest, or am I working through a wound? If the answer is rest, the fantasy is probably serving you. If the answer is a wound, you might benefit from changing the scene, not from suppressing it entirely. For example, when Elena notices that the argument loop is heating her up, she can deliberately replace it with a neutral sensory image, walking a familiar path, listening to rain, arranging a quiet room. The brain still gets a story, but not one that demands a resolution. There is also a place for a deliberate pre-sleep fantasy practice. Some people use it as a mental wind-down ritual. They choose a low arousal setting, perhaps a cabin by a lake or a slow train journey, and allow the details to unfold without conflict. The key is to make the fantasy wide and soft rather than urgent and unresolved. You are not trying to solve anything. You are giving your mind a gentle place to land. This is different from the automatic loop because you choose the tempo. What makes this topic so human is that the final minutes of the day are rarely empty. They are filled with the day's leftovers, the self you wish you had been, and the relationships you still need. The fantasy before sleep is not a glitch in the system. It is the system doing one of its oldest jobs, preparing for the next day by rehearsing, repairing, and restoring a sense of agency. The problem is not the existence of the inner world. The problem is only when the inner world starts to cost you the outer one. Tonight, when the first scene appears behind your closed eyes, you can greet it with curiosity instead of judgment. You can notice whether it is a warm room or a burning one. You can ask what need it is trying to meet. You do not have to narrate this aloud or turn it into a project. Just knowing that the fantasy has a purpose can loosen its grip. The mind is not misbehaving. It is showing you, in its own private language, what mattered today and what still feels unfinished. In the end, the people who fantasize before sleep are not failing at rest. They are often doing a quiet form of emotional work. They are rebalancing power, seeking closeness, or simply keeping a beloved inner world alive. The task is not to shut that world down. The task is to make sure it leads you towards sleep rather than away from it. And that, for many people, is simply a matter of choosing a softer story.